My name is Elena Castillo. I am 31 years old. And the day my father gathered us for what he called a family business meeting, he looked me straight in the eyes and told me I was worth nothing to him. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place at his table, trying to prove that I belonged in the legacy my mother helped build. It took me 31 years to learn that some people decide your worth before you even walk into the room. I was sitting in the conference room of my father's construction company, the one he had built from a single truck and a toolbox when I was still in diapers. The same company I had worked at every summer since I was 14, filing invoices, answering phones, learning how to read blueprints, while my stepbrother Derek played video games in the back office. I knew the smell of sawdust and fresh concrete the way other kids knew the smell of their mother's cooking. This company was supposed to be my future. My stepmother Patricia sat at my father's right hand like she always did, her smile tight and polished, her nails freshly done in that shade of red she always wore to important meetings. Derek slouched next to her, scrolling through his phone, barely pretending to care about whatever announcement was coming. He was wearing a designer shirt that cost more than my monthly car payment, a gift from Patricia for his 28th birthday last month. My father, Richard Castillo, cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table to Derek. After a lot of thought, he said, "I have decided to transfer full ownership of Castillo Construction to Derek. Effective immediately." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my fingers went numb. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. I thought maybe this was some kind of test, some strange way of seeing how I would react before he announced the real plan. Derek looked up from his phone, surprised for maybe half a second, then grinned that easy, confident grin he had inherited from his mother. "Thanks, Dad," he said, like someone had just handed him the keys to a new car instead of a company worth $12 million. I turned to my father. My voice came out steadier than I expected, though inside I felt like I was falling from a great height. "What about me?" Richard barely glanced my way. His eyes slid past me like I was a piece of furniture he had stopped noticing years ago. "You have your degree, Elena. You can get a job anywhere. Derek needs this. He is family." The words hit me like a physical blow. "I am your daughter," I said. "I have worked here since I was a teenager. I know every client, every contract, every supplier we have. I have spent weekends fixing payroll errors and holidays reviewing project bids." Derek has never read a single financial report in his life. Patricia leaned forward, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness, the same tone she used when she wanted to seem reasonable while being anything but. "Elena, honey, this is not about who worked harder. It is about what is best for the family. Derek is going to carry on your father's legacy. You should be happy for him, support him. That is what sisters do. Happy." They wanted me to be happy that the company I had poured years of my life into was being handed to a man who once asked me what OSHA stood for. A man who had shown up to job sites twice in his entire life, both times to take photos for his Instagram. A man whose greatest professional achievement was convincing his mother to raise his allowance. Derek smirked at me across the table, that infuriating smirk I had seen 1,000 times over the past 15 years. "Do not worry, sis. Maybe I will hire you as my assistant, since you're so good with all that paperwork stuff." I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not flip the table and storm out like every cell in my body was begging me to do. I had learned a long time ago that showing emotion in front of Patricia only gave her ammunition. She collected moments of weakness like other people collected stamps, pulling them out whenever she needed to prove that I was the unstable one, the difficult one, the one who could not be trusted with responsibility. Instead, I looked at my father and asked one question. "Does Mr. Brennan know about this?" The room went silent. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Patricia's smile flickered like a light bulb about to burn out. Derek looked confused, which was his default state whenever a conversation moved beyond topics he could Google. Mr. Brennan was Harold Brennan, the company's outside accountant for the past 25 years. He had been there before Patricia, before Derek, before my father decided his new family was more important than his first one. He had known my mother before she died. He had bounced me on his knee at company Christmas parties when I was small. He had taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 16, sitting in his cramped office with spreadsheets spread across his desk like a puzzle waiting to be solved. And he had called me 3 days ago, asking me to come see him before this meeting, saying there were things I needed to understand, things that could not wait. My father recovered quickly, his salesman's instincts kicking in. "Harold is retiring," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "His opinion does not matter anymore. This is a family decision." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I guess we will see about that." I walked out of that conference room with my head high and my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear Patricia calling after me that I was being dramatic, that I was embarrassing myself, that I would regret this the way I always regretted everything. I did not look back. I did not need to. I already knew what I would see. My father's disappointed frown, Patricia's satisfied smile, Derek's confusion slowly morphing into smugness as he realized he had won without even trying. The drive to Harold's office felt longer than it should have. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, searching for signs I should have seen earlier, warnings I should have heeded. But the truth was, the signs had been there for years, I had just refused to see them. Harold Brennan's office was in a small brick building on the other side of town, the kind of place that still had wood paneling and filing cabinets instead of sleek monitors and cloud storage. The carpet was worn thin in front of his desk from decades of clients sitting in the same spot, hearing news both good and bad. He had been doing books for small businesses in this city since before I was born, and his reputation was the kind you could not buy, only earn over decades of honest work and kept secrets. When I walked in, he was waiting for me with a pot of coffee and a stack of folders that looked like they weighed more than I did. His desk lamp cast a warm glow across papers covered in numbers and signatures, and for a moment I felt like I was 16 again, sitting in that same chair, learning what it meant to make money work for you instead of against you. "I figured you would come straight here," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Elena. We have a lot to talk about, and I am afraid we do not have as much time as I would like." I sat. My hands were still shaking from the meeting, but I forced them flat against my knees and waited. He handed me a cup of coffee and settled into his own chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, of secrets kept too long, of promises made to people no longer here to collect on them. "Your father asked me to retire 6 months ago," he said, offered me a very generous package to walk away quietly. More money than I have any right to expect at this stage of my career. I almost took it. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because I made a promise to your mother," he said simply. "Before she passed, she asked me to watch out for you, to make sure you got what was yours when the time came. She said she knew the day would come when your father would try to write you out, and she wanted someone in your corner when it happened. She knew, Elena. She always knew." "Knew what?" Harold opened the first folder and slid it across to me. The papers inside were yellowed with age, but the signatures were clear, the legal language precise. "She knew Richard would choose Patricia over you eventually. She saw it starting even before she got sick, the way he looked at that woman, the way he started pulling away from the life they had built together. She knew the company would be at risk. So she did something about it." I looked down at the papers in front of me. Legal documents, bank statements, contracts I had never seen before. My mother's signature on page after page, dated months before she died, when she should have been resting, should have been spending her last days with family instead of in lawyers' offices planning for a future she would never see. "I do not understand," I said. Harold leaned forward, his eyes bright with an intensity I had never seen from him before. "Your mother was not just Richard's wife, Elena. She was his original partner. When they started Castillo Construction, she put up half the capital. Her father had left her a small inheritance, and she invested every penny in your father's dream. She handled the books, the permits, the contracts. She was the one who negotiated with suppliers and banks. Your father was good with his hands, good with workers, good at building things, but your mother was the one who made it a real business. I knew some of this. I had heard stories about my mother staying up late with spreadsheets, about her fighting with suppliers who tried to shortchange them, about her driving across town to deliver a bid in person because she did not trust the mail. But my father rarely talked about her after he remarried, and Patricia made sure any photos or reminders were quietly removed from the house. By the time I was 18, it was like my mother had been erased from our family history. Before she got sick, Harold continued, your mother came to me. She was worried about what would happen to her share of the company if something happened to her. She did not trust that Richard would protect your interests, especially if he remarried. She had seen how he looked at other women. She knew his weaknesses better than anyone. So we set up a separate entity, a holding company that owns 51% of Castillo Construction's real assets. My breath caught in my throat. What? Harold smiled. The first real smile I had seen from him in years. A smile of satisfaction at a job well done. Your mother transferred her half of the original investment, plus the intellectual property, the client contracts, and the rights to the company name, into a trust. That trust is controlled by the holding company. And the holding company, Elena, belongs to you. I stared at him. The words made sense individually, but together they formed a picture I could not quite bring into focus. That is not possible, I finally said. My father has been running the company for 15 years. He makes all the decisions, he signs all the checks, he acts like he owns everything. He runs the operations, Harold agreed. But the assets, the real value, that has been held separately this whole time. Richard knows this. He has always known. Your mother told him when she set it up, she said it was for tax purposes, for liability protection. She told him it would be easier to keep things separate in case of lawsuits or creditors. He agreed because it sounded smart, and because your mother always handled the complicated parts. He just assumed you would never find out the truth, or that by the time you did, you would be too grateful for whatever scraps he threw you to ask questions. I thought about all the years I'd worked at that company, the summers I spent learning the business from the ground up while Derek lounged by the pool, the times my father praised Derek for showing up to a job site once while I managed payroll and scheduling in the background. The way Patricia smiled at me, like I was a temporary inconvenience she was waiting to expire. The way my father looked through me instead of at me, like I was already a ghost. They were going to give everything to Derek, I said slowly. Everything that should have been mine, everything my mother built. They were going to try, Harold said. But they cannot transfer what they do not own. The company Derek just received is an operating shell. The real value, the contracts, the equipment, the intellectual property, all of it, is in the holding company. And that has been in your name since you turned 25, just like your mother specified. She wanted you to have time to grow up to figure out who you were. She did not want you to inherit a burden. She wanted you to inherit a foundation. I looked at the documents again, really looked this time. My mother's handwriting in the margins. Notes about protecting the legacy, about making sure the next generation had something to build on, about not letting anyone steal what the family had earned. Her handwriting was neat and precise. The same handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and permission slips and notes left on the kitchen counter, telling me she loved me and would be home late. She knew, I whispered. She knew this would happen. Harold nodded. Lucia was the smartest person I ever met, he said quietly. She loved your father, but she was not blind. She saw how he changed when Patricia came into the picture. She saw how Derek got everything while you got excuses. She saw it starting before she even got her diagnosis. She could not stop it from happening, but she could make sure it did not destroy you. I sat there for a long time, holding papers that felt like a lifeline thrown across 15 years of grief and dismissal. My mother had been gone since I was 16, and I had spent every year since then feeling like I was fighting alone, like I was the only one who remembered what our family used to be. I was not alone. I had never been alone. She had been there the whole time, waiting in legal documents and trust agreements for the day I would need her most. What happens now? I asked. Now, Harold said, reaching for another folder, we show your father what his legacy actually looks like, without the parts your mother built. and we make sure he understands exactly what he has lost. The meeting was set for the following Monday at my father's lawyer's office. Neutral ground, Harold called it, though nothing about this situation felt neutral to me. I spent the weekend going through every document Harold had given me, cross-referencing records, building a timeline of exactly how my mother had structured everything. The more I read, the more I understood why she had done it this way. Hidden, but legal. Protected, but accessible. A safety net woven so carefully that my father had never even noticed he was standing on borrowed ground. When I walked into that conference room, my father was already there with Patricia, Derek, and a lawyer I did not recognize. He was expensive looking, the kind of lawyer who charged $500 an hour to make problems disappear. Harold sat on my side of the table, a single briefcase in front of him, containing what he called the full picture. My father barely looked at me. He was talking to his lawyer in low tones, probably strategizing how to handle whatever emotional outburst they expected from me. Patricia was examining her reflection in her phone screen, adjusting her hair. Derek was, predictably, playing a game on his tablet, the sound muted but his thumbs moving frantically across the screen. I sat down across from them and waited. My father's lawyer, a man named Sullivan with silver hair and an expensive watch and the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and yacht clubs, cleared his throat. Miss Castillo, we understand you have some concerns about the recent transfer of ownership. We are prepared to offer you a modest settlement in exchange for your agreement not to contest the arrangement. A clean break for everyone. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. I glanced at it without touching it. The number had 6 figures, but started with a 2. Less than I had earned the company in contracts last year alone. My father finally looked at me. It is more than fair, Elena. You have no legal claim to the company. Your mother's share reverted to me when she passed. Take the money and move on with your life. Find a husband. Have some kids. Stop trying to be something you are not. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Let them think I was considering their offer. Let them think they had already won. Then I turned to Harold and nodded. He opened his briefcase and began laying out documents like cards in a game only he knew how to win. Each page landed on the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Mr. Castillo, he said, addressing my father with formal politeness that somehow sounded more threatening than any raised voice. I have been your accountant for 25 years. In that time, I have watched you build Castillo Construction from a small operation into a significant regional business. I have also watched you systematically ignore the legal structures your first wife put in place to protect her investment and her daughter's inheritance. My father's face went red, the vein in his temple pulsing the way it did when he was about to lose his temper. Harold, this is not the time to— It is exactly the time, Harold interrupted, his voice calm but firm. He held up a document with my mother's signature, the ink faded but still perfectly legible. This is the original partnership agreement between Richard Castillo and Lucia Mendez Castillo, dated 1994. It clearly states that both partners contributed equally to the startup capital and that shares would be divided accordingly. It also includes a survivorship clause that your wife modified before her death. Sullivan leaned forward, suddenly interested. Survivorship clauses are standard. When one partner dies, their share typically transfers to the surviving partner. We have documentation showing, typically Harold agreed, cutting him off, but Lucia amended this agreement 6 months before her death. She exercised her right to transfer her share to a separate legal entity rather than allow it to revert to Richard. That entity is Mendez Holdings, and it has owned 51% of the company's core assets ever since. Patricia's smile finally cracked, her composure slipping for the first time since I had known her. That is ridiculous, she said, her voice shrill. Richard has been running this company alone for 15 years. There is no Mendez Holdings. We would have known. Our accountants would have found it. Harold pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. There is, and there has been. Your accountants did not find it because they were not looking for it. They assumed Richard owned everything because that is what Richard told them. He paused and looked directly at my father. Isn't that right, Richard? My father said nothing. His face had gone from red to white, and I watched him do the math in his head, watched him realize how badly he had miscalculated. Harold continued, his voice steady and relentless. Mendez Holdings owns the intellectual property rights to the Castillo construction name and logo. It owns the original equipment inventory that formed the basis of the company's early contracts. And most importantly, it holds the master contracts with your 6 largest clients, the ones that represent 70% of your annual revenue. Without those contracts, the operating company you just transferred to Derek is worth approximately nothing. He laid out the client contracts one by one, spreading them across the table like evidence at a trial. Each one clearly showed Mendez Holdings as the contracting party, with Castillo Construction listed as the operating subsidiary. My father was on his feet, his chair crashing backward. "This is fraud," he shouted, pointing at Harold with a shaking finger. "You forged these documents. Lucia never would have done this behind my back. She loved me. She trusted me." Harold did not flinch. Lucia did exactly what any smart businesswoman would do when she saw her husband being manipulated by a woman who cared more about status than partnership. She protected her daughter's future because she knew you would not. Sullivan was flipping through the documents with increasing alarm, his expensive confidence evaporating with each page he turned. "Richard," he said quietly, "these look legitimate. The signatures match, the dates align with public records. If this holding company has been in place since 2009. Derek finally looked up from his tablet, his face twisted in confusion. "Wait, what does this mean? Do I own the company or not? Dad, what is happening?" I spoke for the first time since the meeting began, my voice calm and clear. "You own an operating company with no assets, no intellectual property, and no client contracts. You own the right to call yourself CEO of a shell. Congratulations." Derek's face went pale. His tablet slipped from his fingers and clattered on the table. "Dad?" My father was staring at Harold like he wanted to reach across the table and strangle him. "How much?" he asked through gritted teeth, his voice barely above a whisper. "How much do you want to make this go away?" Harold shook his head. "It is not for sale, Richard. Elena owns Mendez Holdings outright. The trust transferred to her when she turned 25, just as Lucia specified. Every decision about the company's future is hers to make. Not yours, not anymore." Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward with a crash. "This is insane," she shrieked, all pretense of composure gone. "She is trying to steal what we built. Richard, do something. Call the police, call someone." I looked at her calmly, feeling a strange peace settle over me. "What you built? You married my father 3 years after my mother died. By that point, every contract, every asset, every piece of equipment that matters was already protected. You did not build anything, Patricia. You just spent the profits and pretended they were yours." For the first time in 15 years, I saw fear in Patricia's eyes, real fear, not the performative anxiety she used to manipulate my father. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, like she had finally realized that the quiet stepdaughter she had dismissed for so long was not as powerless as she had believed. Sullivan was already packing up his briefcase, his hands moving quickly. "Richard," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I need to review these documents with my team. I strongly advise against any further discussions until we understand the full legal situation. We may need to bring in specialists." My father did not move. He just stared at me, his face cycling through emotions I had never seen him show before. Shock, betrayal, anger, and underneath it all, buried so deep I almost missed it, something that looked almost like respect. "Your mother," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "She planned this, all those years ago. She planned for me to have a choice. I corrected him. She could not stop you from pushing me aside, but she made sure I would not be left with nothing when you did. She loved you, Dad. But she loved me more." He sat back down heavily, like someone had cut his strings. "I did not push you aside, Elena. I was trying to keep the family together. Derek needed stability. Derek needed nothing. I cut him off. Derek has had everything handed to him his entire life. A car at 16. A job he never showed up for. A title he never earned. And now a company that does not actually exist. What exactly did Derek need that I was not willing to give?" What did I ever do to deserve being erased from my own family? Derek was looking between me and my father, finally grasping that the empire he thought he had inherited was built on sand. This is not fair, he said, sounding for all the world like a child who had been told he could not have dessert. You cannot just take it all. Mom, tell her she cannot do this. Patricia grabbed Derek's arm and pulled him toward the door. We are leaving, she announced, her voice shaking with rage. This is not over. We will sue. We will prove these documents are fake. We will drag you through every court in this state until you have nothing left. You will do whatever you think is best, Harold said mildly, but I would advise you to consult with your own accountant first. The holding company's records are impeccable. Lucia made sure of that. She knew this day would come. They left without another word, Patricia's heels clicking furiously against the tile floor, Derek stumbling after her like a confused puppy. My father stayed. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the table. I tried to see the man who had taught me to read blueprints, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, who had once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I tried to find the father I remembered, from before Patricia, before Derek, before everything went wrong. I could not find him anymore. That man had been buried under 15 years of Patricia's whispers and Derek's demands, and the slow erosion of everything my mother had loved about him. What do you want, Elena? He asked finally, his voice tired and old. What will it take to fix this? I stood up and gathered my documents, placing each one carefully back in its folder. I want you to understand something, I said. I am not doing this for revenge. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because my mother spent the last months of her life making sure I would have a foundation to stand on, and I am not going to let anyone take that away from me. Not you. Not Patricia. Not Derek. Not anyone. I paused at the door and looked back at him one last time. You can keep running the operations if you want. I am not interested in forcing you out. But the major decisions go through me now. The financials go through Harold. And Derek does not get to pretend he is in charge of something he never bothered to understand. My father did not answer. He just sat there, looking older than I had ever seen him, the weight of his choices finally visible on his face. I walked out into the parking lot and stood next to my car for a long time, letting the sun warm my face and the reality settle into my bones. My mother had been gone for 15 years. But in that moment, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since the day she died. I could almost hear her voice, soft and warm, telling me she was proud of me, telling me I had done the right thing, telling me everything was going to be okay. Thank you, I whispered to the empty air. I will not waste this. I promise. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life, but also the most meaningful. I restructured Castillo Construction from the ground up, keeping the name my mother had helped build but changing almost everything else. The first thing I did was hire a new CFO, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had spent 20 years turning around failing businesses. She looked at our books, looked at our contracts, looked at the mess my father and Patricia had made of the operational finances, and said, "This is fixable, but it is going to hurt." It did hurt. We had to cut staff, renegotiate contracts, and sell off equipment that was costing more to maintain than it was worth. My father fought me on every decision at first, insisting that I was destroying what he had built, that I did not understand how business worked, that I should leave the hard choices to people with more experience. But Margaret's numbers did not lie, and eventually, even he had to admit that the company had been bleeding money for years under his management. Patricia had been spending faster than the business could earn. The books had been manipulated to hide the losses. Without the intervention, Castillo Construction would have been bankrupt within 5 years. Patricia filed for divorce 11 months after the meeting. The prenup my father had signed, the one she had insisted on to protect her own assets before the marriage, turned out to protect his as well. She walked away with the house, 2 cars, and a settlement that was generous but not devastating. Within a year, she had remarried some other wealthy man and moved to Florida. I never saw her again. Derek struggled without his mother there to advocate for him and without a company to pretend to run. He bounced between sales jobs and startup schemes, each one failing faster than the last. He tried to become an influencer, posting videos about luxury lifestyle and entrepreneurship, but his follower count never broke 1,000. Eventually, 2 years after the meeting, he reached out to me. The email was short and surprisingly honest. I know I was a terrible stepbrother. I know I never deserved what Dad tried to give me. I know I treated you like you did not matter. I am not asking for money or a job. I just wanted to say I am sorry, and I hope someday you can forgive me for being such an ass. I did not respond right away. I was not ready. The wounds were still too fresh, the memories too raw. But I saved the email, and a year later, when Derek completed a construction management certificate at a community college, when he proved he could actually show up and work and learn, I offered him an entry-level position at the company. Not as a favor, not as charity, but as a chance to prove he could be someone different. He took it. And to everyone's surprise, including his own, he was not terrible at it. My father and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, painfully, one honest conversation at a time. He admitted that Patricia had convinced him I did not need the company, that my independence was a sign I did not care about the family legacy. He admitted that he had been jealous of how much my mother had trusted me and how little she had trusted him in the end. He admitted that giving everything to Derek had been as much about punishing me for being like her as it had been about rewarding Derek for being easy to control. These were not easy conversations. There were tears on both sides. There were shouting matches that ended with one of us walking out. There were moments when I thought the relationship was broken beyond repair. But we kept trying, because that is what my mother would have wanted. On my mother's 20th death anniversary, my father and I drove to the cemetery together. We stood in front of her headstone, the one that read Lucia Mendez Castillo, beloved mother, brilliant partner, and my father said something I never thought I would hear from him. She was right about me, he said, his voice cracking. She knew I was weak. She knew I would let someone else tell me what to do. She knew I would fail you. She protected you because she knew I would not. And I am so sorry, Elena. I am so sorry for all of it. I took his hand, weathered and calloused from decades of construction work. She also loved you, I said. She would not have fought so hard to save the company if she did not believe you were worth saving. She would not have built something with you if she did not believe in what you could become. He squeezed my hand and did not let go for a long time. 5 years after that first meeting in the lawyer's office, Castillo Mendez Construction won a state award for excellence in sustainable building practices. We had pivoted hard into green construction, focusing on energy-efficient homes and commercial buildings that prioritized environmental impact alongside profit margins. It was a gamble that Margaret had pushed for and that my father had initially resisted, but the market shifted in our direction, and suddenly we were not just surviving, we were leading. I stood on a stage at the award ceremony, holding a plaque with both my parents' names on it, and I thought about everything it had taken to get there. The betrayal in that conference room, the discovery of what my mother had hidden, the legal battles and family fractures, the slow, painful process of rebuilding trust with a father who had tried to erase me, the unexpected redemption of a stepbrother I had written off as hopeless. In my acceptance speech, I told a shortened version of the story, how I had been written off by my own family, how my mother had seen it coming and prepared anyway, how the inheritance that mattered most was not money or property, but the belief that I was capable of more than anyone around me wanted to admit. I did not name names or air dirty laundry. That was not the point. The point was this: someone had believed in me when no one else did. And that belief had been strong enough to survive death, survive betrayal, survive 15 years of being told I was not enough. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 23, nervous, clutching a program with my photo on it. Her hands were shaking, the way mine used to shake when I was trying to find the courage to speak up. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. My family is like yours. They think my brother should get everything because he is the son. They think I should just get married and let someone else take care of me. They tell me I am too ambitious, too difficult, too much, but hearing your story made me think, maybe I do not have to accept that. Maybe I can build my own thing. I took her hand and held it firmly. You can, I told her. And when they doubt you, when they try to erase you, when they tell you that wanting more makes you ungrateful, remember that their limitations are not your destiny. You do not have to stay in rooms where your value is up for debate. Build new rooms, find new people, and never let anyone convince you that you are worth less than you are. She nodded, eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. I gave her my card. If you ever need advice, I said, or just someone to remind you that you are not crazy for wanting what you want, call me. I mean it. She thanked me and walked away, and I watched her go with a feeling I could not quite name. Pride, maybe? Hope? The sense that the story my mother had started was continuing in ways neither of us could have imagined. That night, I went home to the house I had bought with my own money, the first home that had ever truly belonged to me. On my dresser sat a framed photo of my mother, taken a few months before she got sick. She was laughing at something off camera, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes full of the fierce intelligence that had made her such a force in the world. Next to the photo was a small wooden box containing the original partnership agreement, the one with her signature next to my father's. I kept it there as a reminder of where I came from and what I had almost lost. I picked up the photo and held it for a moment, studying her face, looking for pieces of myself in her features. I did it, Mom, I said quietly. I did not let them erase me. I built something real. I made it mean something. I hope you're proud of me. The photo did not answer. It never did. But somewhere in the silence, I felt her. The way I always did when I needed her most. A warmth in my chest, a steadiness in my spine. The unshakable knowledge that I was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone as long as I carried her memory with me. I put the photo back and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more battles to fight, more rooms to build. But tonight I rested, knowing that the foundation underneath me was solid. My mother had made sure of that. And I was going to spend the rest of my life proving she was right to believe in me. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Being the overlooked child does not mean you are worthless. It usually just means the people around you are too threatened by your potential to let it grow. You do not owe your loyalty to people who see you as an obstacle instead of a family member. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from family. Especially from family. And if someone, anyone, believes in you enough to fight for your future, do not waste that gift. Honor it. Build on it. Pass it forward. Because one person believing in you at the right time can change everything. Be open to finding that person. And when you can, be that person for someone else.